Hello and welcome to the front page. Last week, the sport was left stunned and dismayed by an incomprehensible act of violence against the family of one of our own. The murders of Carol, Hannah and Louise Hunt, the wife and two of the daughters of BBC radio commentator Jon Hunt, has left the entire sport speechless. Jon, as everyone who knows him testified, is one of the most generous and kind people in our industry, and everyone has rallied together to offer him the support and love which we hope will provide some comfort as he and his family come to terms with this terrible crime. Jon, we will be there for you in the weeks and months and years to come. I'm very pleased to be joined this week in the studio by Peter Scargill and Jon Harding, who are going to discuss with me the biggest stories from the last week, including the July festival at Newmarket. But gentlemen, I'm afraid I have to begin.
You don't have to begin.
I do have to begin.
You don't have to begin, you want to begin.
I want to begin with the events of last night, which, Jon, you've dressed in sort of funereal clothes today.
Yeah, I did think about the black tie. Devastated.
Yeah.
In a word.
You thought it was coming home?
To my core. Yes, I thought it was coming home. Naively, perhaps, but
yeah.
It will eventually.
It will eventually. But you are hosting again, so. And Pete, you're famously jaded and cynical, so.
But my rich Spanish heritage meant that last night was a great victory for my.
So a lot of people in the west of Scotland were talking the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, best team won, which wasn't England. But we made it through to the finals. That's good, isn't it? That's
very
good. That's good.
Considering the tournament started pretty unpromisingly, it was very good.
I will take out what positives I can.
Yeah.
And realise that in the end, it's only a game of football.
It is. It is, exactly. Jon, you'll come to understand. You just need to.
It's only a game.
You just need to repress your emotions, abandon hope. Hope. There's nothing but pain comes from hope, Jon. It's important in a sporting sense. You expect and indeed embrace, as we in Scotland do, failure.
Great, thank you. I feel inspired.
Superb. Let's turn to Newmarket, gentlemen. Pete, you were there, of course, for the July festival. Probably, I guess, the sort of highlight, I guess, Ancient Truth, Guineas' favourite, albeit in a fairly uninformative sort of race in that the
yes, can a horse's performance be taken in isolation, I suppose, isn't it? Because
exactly.
if you're looking from the perspective of form and depth and all that kind of stuff, you go, well, for all that there was a Coventry placed horse in the race, it was not the strongest when you're relative stakes. You had the 3 withdrawals on the morning of the race, but he was very impressive. He's unbeaten all of 3 of his starts. And it wasn't like Charlie Appleby and William Buick said afterwards, that was the best performance this horse is ever going to produce. But Appleby said, when asked by ITV Racing, 8 out of 10. Buick said it'll get better and better. So he was the horse you came away thinking, well, there's something here, and he's going to follow that classic Appleby Godolphin route of going national stakes, then presumably Dewhurst, and he's prominent in the Guineas market for what that's worth at this stage. So it's one of those.
The sort of 10 to 14, 16 to 1 would sort of gives you the indication of just how open that market is at this stage. But
precisely. I mean, I can't remember what price City of Troy was after he won the race last year, but I'd imagine he would have been shorter than that.
Yeah.
Should have checked before I came in. Failure on my part there. But you've not come away with that sort of impression of a horse, obviously, and to some extent, I mean, City of Troy only won a maiden before he went to Newmarket. It was Ancient Truth won the 2, but he did very well, and he was the one horse, not the one horse, but he was the main horse you came away from the meeting with going, that was good, that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Ancient Truth was probably the star in a meeting that was more for horses who were sort of admirable Group 1 performances. And that's slightly sort of a naff phrase, isn't it, almost? Because if you're a Group 1 horse, you're a very good horse, but horses like Porter, Fortuna and Millstream were always being down with faint praise, weren't they? They're solid, dependable Group 1 horses taking the races.
Yeah, well, let's turn to the July Cup then. I mean, on RPRs in today's paper, well below par sort of race. I guess the big story coming out of it was, of course, William Buick getting his 100th top tier victory.
Yeah, outstanding jockey. Obviously rides lots of extremely talented horses. Won his first Guineas this year with notable speech. Now he's got 100 Group Grade 1 winners. I mean, the guy's obviously champion jockey. He's an excellent jockey and a very good ambassador for the sport as well. He always speaks very well when he does so. Millstream, he is probably the best sprinter around. He won the.
It's not a great division, is it?
This is again, it's a little bit
crying out for.
It's the ancient truth argument, isn't it? It makes you wonder about the progress of sprinters coming through. You look at a race like the Commonwealth Cup that should be producing horses coming through for this race.
Yeah, but a lot of people are talking now, is it going to even be a Group 1 next year?
Well, I don't think it should be, Tom.
Well, that's one for the European Patent Committee.
Yes, I urge the European Patent Committee to downgrade the Commonwealth Cup.
First time we've had that on the show.
Yeah.
Addressing the European Patent Committee.
I addressed them directly today.
Excellent.
He was arguably the right winner. I thought Van Dijk ran quite a nice race for it, and we clearly blew up. He came into the race well, and he's a promising 3-year-old for the rest of the season. But yeah, I mean, that race is an example of sort of how the July meeting was to some extent. Not nice, good winners, nice stories, and lots. But then there wasn't many going. Oh, I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, we'll return to that in a second. I mean, if we dwell a second more on the sprint division, and just to sort of the situation there right now. Obviously at Ascot we had an outsider winning one top tier race for the second year in a row. We had a pretty modest Australian sprinter coming over winning the other one, and we've obviously got a lot of sort of older horses who are now, they'll be shipped out by the first person who comes along and offers a decent 6-figure sum for them. So it's really a facet of the flat, John, that looks pretty flimsy at this point.
Yeah, I was sort of hoping Inner Sharon would be the one who kind of had a little bit of star power maybe after Royal Ascot and the performance there, but I'll be interested to know what sort of happened there, because he ran really no sort of race. Or certainly not the type of race we'd expect from him. That's probably a bit unfair to say he ran no race, but we expected him to go out and win probably. And the division generally is, maybe it doesn't quite get the love still of the middle distance is still the main game here. It's ripe for a standout.
Yeah, and let's talk about the atmosphere at Newmarket, of course, Pete, because when people came together on Thursday, for many within the sport, that would be the first time they'd be seeing many of their friends and colleagues since the awful news about John Hunt's family had emerged. What was the atmosphere like, Pete?
Weird, one way to put it. Lots of people sort of walking around dazed, really.
Yeah.
One colleague wrote back saying lots of people's heart wasn't really in being at the races that day. Having to go about doing your job when that was on. So, I mean, the minute's silence was pretty well observed, although not exclusively well. And there was reasons for the PA system didn't work particularly well and what have you. So I'm not sure how well people were in terms of knowing when it started and when it stopped and what have you. But I think particularly for the people who were there, it was helpful to be able to talk about what had happened. But it was sombre, and lots of people were stunned and shocked, as you would imagine. And lots of people also sharing their stories of John and what he's like, and the familiarity in terms of how people spoke about or speak about him. Because we know John, we didn't know his wife and 2 daughters as well, and we don't know his other daughter Amy as well, most of us. But in terms of our collective experience of John, it's all very similar in terms of how he said. It's quite reassuring to be able to have those discussions. But yeah, it was a weird day on Thursday. I'm not sure too many of us coped very well.
No, it's the July Festival normally is such a enjoyable part of the summer programme, but of course this year everyone's thoughts just dominated by those terrible crimes. And it's often said that racing comes together extremely well to support its colleagues and professionals when when they find themselves in times of crisis. We've certainly seen that again, but then also I think the sort of magnitude of this, even in a sport that's used to, it's a tough sport, that is all too used to dealing with people being plunged into really sort of unimaginable situations. This has certainly, tested even that sort of resolve.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you wrote in an email to members about, we've had Stefano Kirky this year. Obviously, the jockey who lost his life in Australia. Terrible tragedy involving Graham Lee back end of last year. And these were both instances where racing came together to support these people and offer them, condolence and support and what have you. But it's very much the case. Like you say, I think the magnitude of what's happened and the family that it's happened to has only increased that. And I think the point that I tried to convey in what I wrote from Newmarket on Thursday was that even if not everybody was breaking down in tears or dazed and not paid it, like genuinely everyone is thinking of Jon and his family. Like everyone was making a point saying it, whether they were being interviewed, you were discussing afterwards. It really is first and foremost in everyone's minds, and it will continue to be, because the world will move on. I don't mean that in a callous way. That's just life, isn't it? But racing will make sure that Jon and his family are looked after and cared for as best we can for in perpetuity, frankly.
Yeah, well said. Let's move to the weekend action, and we don't we don't really call it Super Saturday anymore. I don't know if we do call it Super Saturday, because previously this was the sort of day that we had all this top grade racing clustered into a very tight period. It's now been elongated slightly with Chester booted out of the core of the afternoon as part of the sport's premierisation strategy. Chester, it's fair to say, were extremely unhappy about this. We don't have a crowd figure yet, but they were predicting a massive fall off in the attendance for that meeting. So we'll find out today, hopefully, whether that actually occurred. But they're very unhappy about it and sort of questioning whether this is actually, to the benefit of the sport. Yes, well, I mean, you can understand, because Chester rams them in, doesn't it? It's a very successful course in getting people to come to these Saturday meetings, and by dint of it starting at 4:20, wasn't it, on Saturday, they're naturally going to lose people who might go with children or what have you, want to go earlier in the day. So, I mean, it's indicative of the slightly muddled thinking, if that's not underplaying it, of premierisation, in that there were three sort of Premier meetings in the protected window. There was York, Ascot and Newmarket, and there's supposed to be two. You had the July Cup outside of the protected window at 4:35 after Chester had started. So if you are a racecourse like Chester, who's gone reluctantly or otherwise, okay, fine, we'll step back for the greater good, and then you look at this and you go, hang on a second, why have we given this up when this still doesn't seem to work? They said as well, everyone else complains and then somehow gets reinstated in those slots, but we don't. So.
I quite like it. I like Super Saturday. I think you should have Premier racing as it is and just have this one weekend where you have the complete opposite and it is really busy, and you sell it as such, and then the data that you glean from that weekend in terms of betting turnover attendances offers quite a useful little point of comparison to, say, the weekends around it where there is that protected window.
Totally. I agree with you.
I think they're missing a trick.
It's a novelty, isn't it? Super Saturday, the branding goes with it, the idea that all around the country you've got high quality racing going on. One of the things I've always thought with this protected window that sort of misses the point slightly is that Saturdays are the biggest day of the week for going racing, naturally. And while there's clearly some benefit in having a better paced programme of racing for people watching on TV, for those who are spread around the country and want to go racing, you are diminishing the opportunities for them to do so. And that surely has to have some impact both on crowds, but also then your engagement with a more casual audience.
And it's great for jockeys too, just thinking from a participant's point of view. Obviously you've got yards of having to send horses here, there and everywhere, which is probably not ideal, but there's jockeys riding at Ascot and having winners at Ascot on Saturday who probably wouldn't have had those opportunities because the likes of Buick were at Newmarket. So there are many virtues, I think, to that day. They just have to get behind it.
Yeah. Okay, we'll leave the racing action there. We're going to move on to another story in just a second, but before that, just a quick sort of public service announcement for fans of golf. Steve Palmer will be broadcasting on Tuesday in the sweet spot with his advice for the Open, and then there will be a watch-along, a must-watch watch-along, as anyone who has seen Steve Palmer in action will know, which will be on Sunday from 1:30 with undoubtedly some very special guests. Okay, now we are going to turn to the next story, which is racing's docuseries heaven, basically. Is you wait, like London buses, for a docuseries to come along and then two come along at once. Well, if you don't have Amazon Prime. Anyways, so we've got Horsepower, which has previously been on Amazon, but has now come to BBC 4. That focuses on Andrew Balding's yard. But arguably more exciting, without any disrespect to Horsepower, is the ITV big budget show Champions, which is going to begin broadcasting on Friday. It follows jumps racing and begins at King George Day. And we are promised that this is going to be racing's answer to Drive to Survive. Of course, Drive to Survive, the Formula One show, which has led to a real explosion in popularity for that sport as a whole new audience, a whole new generation was introduced to the characters, the stories, the tracks that make up the pinnacle of motorsports. John, what do we know about Champions?
Yeah, so it's going to follow the 23-24 jump season, getting behind the scenes action. The grit and the glory is a phrase I've heard several times, having spoken to Martin Stevenson at RMG, who RMG obviously supported this along with Flutter.
Yeah.
It's kind of been promised that it's going to be a candid, behind-the-scenes look. There's going to be fairly sort of unadulterated, unfiltered glimpses to what jump jockeys in particular, I think, focuses on the jockeys, what they go through, the enormous risks and reward. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think if it gets in the spirit of a Drive to Survive, where it allows that level of access, that level of letting people just be themselves, and racing has very similar universal stories, I think, to a Formula One or to any sport. It's that enormous risk, high reward, some very dedicated individuals who I hope are allowed to kind of be themselves in the documentary. I'm sure they will be, so really looking forward to it. It's about time. I think racing's been sat patiently in the queue while we've had Formula One and tennis and golf and rugby and everything else. So yeah, looking forward to it. And for it to get that prime slot and not be sort of buried away is really encouraging, I think.
Yeah, and the stakes are higher here because, you know, I guess what we're hoping this will do is that it will take racing and introduce it in a really engaging, dramatised fashion to a whole new audience who otherwise might not necessarily understand or know much about the sport. For it to do that, what do we think the sort of key ingredients are?
I think it's the behind-the-scenes element is really important. What you don't want is a dramatised version of what we get to see on ITV anyway. It has to differentiate itself somehow, which is going to require a level of personal access to the jockeys. I think there's microphones in the weighing room is a good example of an area that we don't usually get to go to. That's going to be key here, really.
Yeah.
And I think, again, just there are so many personalities, just allowing them to almost speak beyond any media training they've received and just to be completely themselves and frank about the risks that they take and the day-to-day. The likes of, you know, I can envisage a Harry Cobden or a Nico de Boinville. They're people who can speak very eloquently about the sport, but hopefully can be honest as well. So
I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Because, you know, I've heard it said to me a few times that there's almost like too much media training in racing now, and people have become very good at understanding like what they should say, what the right thing to say is. But a lot of media training seems to be sort of directed towards ensuring you don't mess up in front of camera, rather than like trying to be interesting, basically, you know.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, when you have a microphone or a reporter jump on you after a race, you know, I suppose there's some logic in a professional sports person having the ability to say, right, I need to do this, not get flustered, make sure I thank all the right people.
Yeah,
I can get that. But if that's what's presented in this series, people will say the right kind of things for you know, brand racing, it's going to be dull, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what we don't want it to be is dull.
Earnest.
Yeah.
Don't want it to be too earnest.
No,
you know?
no. It's it's serious in the sense that that it's winning and losing. It's professional sport, and it matters to people. But it's got to be it's got to be engaging. It's got to make people feel for the persons involved. It's got to make you want to find out more. So if they get all of those ingredients together and say humanise the people involved, I mean,
make you care about them. Make you care about
absolutely,
what happens
absolutely,
to them.
and they're right to focus on the jockeys by the sounds of it, because the jockeys are, they are. It's been written and said that they are the punter, the spectators link to the horse, and then obviously the horse is the ones who but the jockey's that link.
Yeah.
So having that focus is the right way to do it, and focusing on jump racing, I would agree, is the right way to do it. Obviously, it comes with your risks of issues around horses getting hurt and what have you that comes with jumps racing. I don't know whether that's covered in the series or not. It'd be interesting to see whether it is at all. But yeah, it's intriguing, and I'll be interested to see whether it breaks beyond people who already have an interest in racing. That's the key thing, because I'm sure there'll be lots of people who have an interest in racing who will watch it.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be fascinating to see the sport captured in that way, its story is told. But yeah,
it's that breakthrough, isn't it? It's
do people who don't really care about racing, or who maybe watch the Grand National, will they tune in? Will they be engaged? And if it does happen, if it does sort of break through, it's really important that racing sort of builds on that. I mean, I think it's fair to say it's pretty unlikely we're going to have a Drive to Survive on our hands. Not because I think there's any innate drawbacks or failures in the show, which I haven't seen yet, but simply because Drive to Survive is a very rare smash hit success story. But if racing does get that breakthrough, it's really important that the sport builds on this and actually has some plan in place for how it's going to direct people who might suddenly get interested in the sport to engage more deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on the media training, I say good media training allows people to be themselves as well. I think that's kind of like.
Have you been media trained? Is this what you're saying?
No, but I'm saying, but there's an element of it's the media training can sometimes bring out characters, which is what I hope's happened here.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be multiple seasons potentially, is the way they're thinking. Having spoken to Martin Stevenson at RMG, it's very much they're already looking to how can we build on this. You don't want it to just be a one season and then that's it. The thing with Drive to Survive is it logically follows. And in terms of building on it, you'd think a coordinated marketing campaign nationally, building off the back of it. You'd think, well, goodness knows, you'd think ticket deals, you'd think outreach, you'd think massive social media hits, you'd think all of those things.
I'm sure all of that is totally covered.
I'm sure, I'm sure
happen.
There's been lots of thinking about it. Whether it will actually happen on a shoestring budget, I don't know. But that's logically where you'd be going with it, isn't it?
So just very quickly as well, you spoke to Martin Stevenson. He's the outgoing chief executive of the Racecourse Media Group, runs media rights for lots of big race courses. They and Flutter have basically funded this. Tell us why they've done that.
Well, I think the line from Martin Stevenson is sort of a logical thing for us to do. We've got access to the media rights. We've got access to all of this great footage to the racing, and it serves everyone. It's a virtuous circle, isn't it? For bookmakers, for racecourses, for racing. Full stop. Is if you can generate interest, if you can kind of transfer some of those occasional fans into more dedicated followers, they might then have a bet. That's betting turnover. They might then go racing. That's attendances. There's a lot to be gained from this.
Investing in the future of the sport. Jon, you've been doing some work on a forthcoming feature series that we're doing. Some people might have seen shout-outs on social media for people to be part of these pieces, because what we're doing is we're looking at the different generations racing follows and trying to get a sense of what racing's relationship with each of these generations are. Tell us about your experience.
Yeah, I took some Gen Zers to Ascot for some smashed avo on toast and things like that. No, I had 5 originally. 2 didn't turn up and weren't contactable, which is very Gen Z, which is great. The 3 who did were brilliant, really lovely people, and the type of people that you just I wish we had more of them really coming into the sport. And they spoke a lot actually about some of those myths about, because it's a $1 million question, isn't it? How do you get the next generation in there? They won't be interested in the history, they won't be interested in the nuances. It all has to be concerts after racing, quick. actually the opposite is true. The people that I spoke to anyway, they want to be educated. They want racing to come to them and show them what they have and what they can offer. It was really interesting. It's talking about how they first fell in love with, they went racing once, then they started following horses. You know, one of them's favourite horses, August Rodin, was one of the first horses he saw, and he now follows him in his career, which was quite interesting.
Yeah.
But he said that he would go back, and now he's learning about Nijinsky and he's learning about these other horses because he's kind of fascinated in getting a fuller picture, which is just interesting. I think there's this sort of misdirection that young people are just only interested in a quick day out and they have short attention spans, but I think the opposite is true.
Very interesting, and it's going to be in the paper and online for members after Glorious Goodwood, I think?
I believe so. Plans do change.
Plans are known to
But that
change.
is the plan.
That is good. If you want to read that and indeed all of our deepest coverage of the sport, then you simply must get a Members Club Ultimate subscription. Details coming up now.
Get 50% off your first 3 months in the Racing Post Members Club. As a member, you get access to the digital newspaper exclusively available to members the night before. You'll get daily tips from the likes of Pricewise Tom Siegel, Robbie Wilders and Paul Keeley. Enjoy award-winning journalism from the industry's best writers and watch replays from all British and Irish racing now available within the Racing Post app. Subscribe today and get 50% off your first 3 months membership.
Welcome back. We're now going to turn to our final story of the day, which is the latest development around affordability checks. Our industry editor Bill Barber, who's been all over this story for more than a couple of years now and is probably the leading authority on the subject, revealed some new research that was published this summer, basically illustrating further how affordability checks could decimate racing's funding model. This research, which was conducted by Professor Forrest, who did a very influential patterns of play survey of more than 100,000 betting accounts, did some deeper analysis on it to understand exactly what different cohorts of that betting audience contribute in terms of revenues. And for racing, they found that the clustering of revenues towards the very highest spending customers was more pronounced than it was for any other form of betting. In fact, Professor Forrest found that the top 1% of horse racing bettors, which comprises only some 60,000 individuals, was generating more than 50% of operator net revenue from horse racing. In other words, more than half of racing's betting revenues are coming from just 1% of its customers. And of course, these customers are exactly those who are most likely to be affected by affordability checks. Now, the data this survey was based on was taken before affordability checks were widely rolled out across the betting industry now, so we do not have current information about how that picture has been affected by the wave of affordability checks which have hit so many medium and high staking punters over the last few years, but we can probably anticipate that the 60,000 high spending bettors is now a diminished pool. Pete, another indication here of how affordability checks are uniquely more dangerous to racing's revenue funding model because of the nature of the sport's relationship with high staking punters.
Yeah, it's perilous, isn't it? When you think about the idea that 60,000 accounts contribute
over 50%.
Yeah. You know, that's fewer people than attend one day at Royal Ascot, isn't it? If you think about it in that terms. So, as you said, the data is pre-affordability check. So, it sort of prepares you for what might come out subsequently, because we've got this figure for now, but what's it going to be like the next time round? We see how these presumably is diminished. Yeah. Because these people are going to be caught in the net more, like because of how it's been. Now, they are working through. We get towards this pilot, which is next month, isn't it?
Yes.
So how this frictionless pilot goes, it really shows you how important it is for racing, and you can see why it's been hammered home in the way it has been, because these numbers are stark, and it's been that way all the way through, isn't it? Every time numbers have come out, they've always been really stark numbers, haven't they?
Yeah,
I mean,
we covered this in detail last year when we scrutinised the white paper claim about what the impact to racing would be, basically demonstrating that DCMS, the department responsible for, completely botched the calculations because they did not make any effort to understand how racing's audience and thus funding mechanisms were different to other forms of betting. So there's just been a lack of appreciation about how racing is uniquely vulnerable to this. Of course, some people would then say, well, being reliant on such a small pool of really high-staking bettors is not a great position for the sport to be in, and that some degree of responsibility thus rests with racing.
For sure. Although it's not racing's fault that there's a small group of people. I mean, what you need to do is have more people betting on the sport fundamentally, don't you? You need a broader base. But I mean, not everyone's going to turn over the sort of money these top people are prepared to do so. I mean, these are people who are prepared to take the risk, and not everyone's going to do that.
Yeah.
You're a certain type of person if you're in that top 1%.
Yeah, and it should be said that although someone bets a lot of money, there is not necessarily a direct relationship there between someone having a gambling problem or anything like that. Racing does attract a lot of sort of well-off individuals who enjoy spending
I think that's
on
the
the
point
sport,
that's made
whether
in
that's
the
ownership
report,
or
isn't it?
it is exactly. It's interesting because this touches on what we were just talking about before, John, because Pete's just said accurately you need to have a broader base if you're going to lose some of those high spenders. The fact is you don't just need a broader base, you need a much broader base, because for every one of those big spenders you lose, you need to get a couple of dozen recreational bettors.
Yeah, you need the base of the pyramid of recreational customers. I mean, you're talking 3 figures probably to replace one of these big, probably possibly even that might even underestimate it. Actually, I'd be really interested to see, sort of as a visual, what other sports, what their sort of makeup look like in terms of the betting turnover that they generate and how much of it. Because you'd imagine football probably more driven by huge recreational interest, perhaps fewer bigger players who focus on racing.
I have actually seen the detail, and it's not as pronounced as you might think it would be in terms of what the top 1% generate. It's all sort of north of 40%, which just illustrates, I think, how what the spectrum of spend is, and thus how much greater the spend at the very top of it is. But the difference, of course, with football is A, there's a much larger recreational audience, and B, football is not reliant on betting for its funding mechanism.
Yeah, and football is a more appealing product to bookmakers, arguably. It becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy when we keep hearing racing's a declining product, but it does have to kind of look at itself and how it is attracting not just the next generation of fan, but the next generation of people who are betting on the sport, because ultimately it relies so heavily on them. And yeah, it's all part of attracting. It plays into all of these themes we've discussed today about just attracting the next generation of people to engage either by going racing or by betting on the sport.
It's particularly acute in racing as well at the moment, given what happened at Bath the week before last with the Flutter and Arc showdown over
the
media rights, which may or may not have gone away in the long term. So
I think we can confidently say it's not gone away. But
we confidently say, can we?
I think we can confidently say that. Yeah.
All right,
so
fine.
I think we
fine. We will confidently say that it's not gone away. And the media rights funding for racing is obviously bigger than the levy. So racing's funding is under pressure from various fronts, you would say. I would say. You wouldn't say it because I just said it to you. I would say.
Let's move swiftly on. Last word on this subject. Stephanie Peacock confirmed at DCMS. John, you obviously did a lot of work around the election. I don't know if we know yet whether she's definitely going to have gambling in her brief, but it seems likely. Just very quickly, what does that mean for racing? Who is Stephanie Peacock, and what can we expect?
So yeah, Stephanie Peacock's on that list of Labour MPs who has a bit of a racing link and has spoken about it before. She's been racing a few times. I know it sometimes feels a bit like clutching at straws there, but she has an awareness of the sport which can't be said for all MPs. It's not just somebody coming in with completely zero knowledge, which has to be encouraging. I know she took part in the Betting and Gaming Council's Grand National Charity Bet, so she's aware at least of the betting industry.
And she
again,
spoke at the affordability. Of course, she had to speak there because she's
Yeah,
the shadow minister responsible.
and she's spoken about the possible impact on racing. So
Yeah.
she's abreast of the issues, which is important. So what can you expect? I'd imagine probably more of the same. Whether she'll be more sympathetic, I don't know, than her predecessor, but she certainly is not arriving with zero knowledge, which has to be a point of encouragement.
Great stuff. We will leave it there. We're all out of time, gentlemen, but thank you very much for joining me. Jon, pleasure. Pete, thanks again. And to you at home. Why are you laughing?
Because it wasn't a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to see you,
Okay.
Pete, as I'm sure the viewers at home agree. But biggest thank you of all to yourself for tuning in. It's been a pleasure as ever, and we hope to see you again next week. Till then, goodbye.